he'll weigh in at 9 a.m. Friday, and this final dehydration will start late Thursday night. So we'll start just a little bit, say at about 10 p.m. that night, where he'll just do a training and he'll sweat a little bit with training, but then we'll wake up probably about an hour to an hour and a half before that 9 a.m. weigh-in, so about 7:30, and that's when we'll continue the sweating. And like I said, there's a lot of factors that work in Alex's favor. He's a big sweater, so in that hour and a half, he can lose, up to 2 to 3 kilos by sweating, which most of us normal mere mortals won't be able to do. So and then he's on weight, but you don't want him to be on weight for too long because, like I said, we've drastically dehydrated him in the days leading up to that. And in 36 hours time, he's got to go fight for a world title. So we've got to rehydrate him, refuel him, and get him back to 100% as fast as we can.
So what does it look like once he gets off the scales? What does the loading phase or just hydrating phase, getting food into him, what's that process like? And what are you thinking?
Yeah. So I guess the best way to explain this is kind of explain the reverse of what's happening with sweating, right? So again, I'll reiterate, he's pretty dehydrated at this stage. He's lost a lot of weight through dehydration, and you've taken a lot of fluid from the inside and you've put it on the outside. But now we need to get fluid back in. So how do we do that? These guys, if this happened to you or me, Brock, we would just go to a hospital and they would put an IV in. They would just put an IV in. They wouldn't put an IV of normal water. They would put what's called a saline solution, either a Hartmann solution. What that solution has in it is both water, glucose, and salt. And the reason that we have that in there is because when I spoke about earlier, when you take salt out of the diet, you release a lot of fluid, is because our body doesn't particularly know how much water it has in it. It only really knows how much salt it has in it, or how salty the water is. And that's what our kidneys is detecting. When water goes through our kidneys, it's detecting how salty that water is. So Brock, if I grab this bottle here, and it's this is not a good example, this is a Trainade, but if it's full of water and I just smash plain water, it's going to make my salty water in my body less salty because I'm diluting that, right? So if that goes through my kidneys will pick that up and it'll go, there's a lot of less salty water here. I must have diluted my body water. So I'm going to pee some of that out to get it back to the saltiness that I like. And that's why when you drink a lot of plain water, you'll just pee it out. You run to the bathroom really quick. But say that I was to put, say, sodium and glucose in there, like we do with Trainade and other rehydration drinks, you create a saltier solution. So when you put that in your body, if there's more salt in there, your kidneys recognize that and they go, we'll hold on to that water because there's more salt in here and we want to balance it back to our preferred saltiness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
The complicated thing when it comes to weight cutting or any athlete that sweats profusely, remember, we're pushing fluid from our body out of our body, and now we want to get it back in. So we have to put it in our mouth, and then we have to get it back into our body and restore that ideal level of saltiness, is that you've moved all the fluid out. So imagine you had a bottle of water that's full of salty water and you just took a lot of the fluid out without the salt, without as much salt. You're just left with a little bit of fluid and a lot of salt, which is what happens when we sweat a lot. So it's a really, really salty solution. So what we actually need to do then is just get the fluid back in order to restore the ideal level of saltiness. And so that's why we use, and why when you go to a hospital, you get a very particular concentration of fluid. It's not a super, super salty drink, but it's not a drink that's completely just water. It's slightly in between, because when you put that back in your body and it moves into all the areas, it's the perfect ratio to restore the ideal saltiness. And then a lot of people probably listening and go, man, what is this guy talking about? Why does this matter? And you go, well, it probably doesn't matter well, it does matter. It does matter to a lot of people. But if you think for the extreme levels that we're dehydrating these guys, if we stuff that up and you stuff up the level of salt in your body, you go too high or too low, you could die. And you see this in marathon running, where guys will run in really hot weather and they sweat a lot and they lose a lot of the fluid and salt, and they just drink plain water. you get a condition called hypo, which means low, natremia, which means blood salt. So you get low blood salt because you're just drinking, like I said, the plain water, and you're diluting the saltiness. Our body doesn't like that. It can't handle it. And it's happened before. People have had seizures and they drop dead because they've diluted all the cells in their body, and it's super dangerous. And you see on the other end with weight cutting, you see this in, say, the ultra endurance world, where people will be putting in two drinks that are too salty, and you can go hyper, which are too much natremia, too much salt in the blood, which goes the other way. And if you get too much salt, same thing, you can have a seizure, you can drop dead. And it's a really fine balancing act. And you really need to keep this act in. And remember, we've purposely dehydrated, so we've played with this balancing act all week, and now we need to reintroduce fluids. So the type of fluid you're putting in is really important. So as soon as Volk steps off that scale, I've got all these drinks weighed out, measured. I have a drinking protocol that's specific for him to make sure that he's putting that fluid in. He's putting, one, the amount of fluid back in that he needs to. Two, he's got the right amount of sodium and glucose and fluid all mixed together, so he's restoring that saltiness. And three, he's putting it in at the right rate, so he's not just sculling it all at once. He's drinking it at the right amount of time so that his kidneys can filter it and put it in the right parts of his body.
When I first thought of doing a podcast in 2019, I wrote down everything that I wanted to achieve with the show. And one thing I never wrote down was to spam you with ads of products that I never really used myself. However, I did write down that I wanted to grow it as big as possible and have as many interesting people on the show as I could. To help make that happen, all I ask is that you leave a review on the podcast platform that you're listening to this episode on and share it with someone that you know it will benefit. If you want to support myself even further, and more importantly, your body transformation, and are interested in having me as your coach to help you achieve the results that you just can't seem to achieve on your own, you can visit teamrockashby.com to see what program fits you best.